Frankenstein has recently been released on Netflix, and I reckon this could be the best adaptation that I've ever seen of the story, which dates back to the early 1800s. Not only was the storytelling incredible, but the visuals were beautiful to look at, and the performances were almost like I was watching a theatre production. This story is all about the deeper themes that are embedded within it, and I'm here to break down the ending and share what the moral of the story truly is. So let's get into it. Here is a review of Frankenstein and the ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Who was the real monster and the deeper themes? One key theme that I took away from this specific interpretation of the story was the identity of who the actual monster of the story was, and how monsters are specifically formed. For example, the creation is what one would traditionally perceive to be the monster of the story because of the way that he looked and behaved in the opening scene, causing absolute terror, roaring with ferocity and killing anybody that was in his sight. However, as we saw, he was merely a subject of his own environment and the way that Victor treated him when he was created, because a monster was how Victor originally perceived him to be. The same could also be said with Victor. Victor Frankenstein came from a household where he wasn't fond of his father, and he'd be punished if he made mistakes or didn't live up to the family name that was bestowed upon him. This was what spurred Victor on to want to surpass his father's greatest achievements. That and the fact that his mother died, so he wanted to bring about a cure for something that was perceived to be impossible: death. There were mirrored behaviors in Victor and his father, especially when Victor imprisoned the creation. He showed no love, compassion, or empathy to the very thing that drove Victor to the point of losing his mind. Instead, he treated it like a thing, even bringing out the cane just like his father did. Victor showed no sense of humanity towards the creation, despite the fact that he was made up of all human parts. When it came to the idea of becoming a subject of your environment, as we saw with the creation, when he was with Elizabeth, there was a soft side to him, and when he spent time in the house with the old man that befriended him, he became exactly what he always wanted to be: a friend. This was where he learned to read, write, and show actual human behaviors, rather than just grunting Victor, because that was all he was taught. Again, this reinforced the idea that if you don't treat somebody like a monster, then they won't become one. Whereas because Victor treated him like one, that was what he ultimately became. But as well as that, in perceiving him to be the monster, that was when Victor actually became the true monster. Violence was inevitable was a line of dialogue that was spoken by the creation when talking about the relationship between the wolves and the sheep, and then the humans and the wolves. And this violence was something that the creation was exposed to by everything that he was ever around, especially when he was first a prisoner and then when he was alone in the woods. So that was why it was something that he resorted to when he saw that there was no love that was for him in the world. So rage was something that he naturally switched to. With Victor creating a monster, playing God, and then relinquishing his responsibility that he had to the monster, which was a life and a person that needed to be taken care of and shaped, even if he didn't see him as that. It showed the risks that came with playing God and then simply neglecting them, because that was what ultimately turned the creation from somebody that once showed affection and love into somebody that was full of revenge and anger. Victor walking away from his creation also painted him as the true monster in the story, because in his pursuit of this project of curing death, he caused the death of Heinrich Harlander, the death of his brother's fiancée Elizabeth, and he damned his creation to an eternity of being alone and persecuted by those on the very planet that he lived on, simply because he was different. When looking at what makes a monster, it isn't the physical deformities or the way an individual looks, like what the story paints out, and how everybody perceived the creation to be with the groans and cries upon looking at him. But instead, it's what's inside and how somebody acts. In the end, Victor became his father due to the way that he was treated, which, in a way, also means that he was like his own creation. He had a physical deformity in losing a leg, and he was exposed to mistreatment from his earliest memories. The ending explained. When it came to the ending of the movie, for the entirety of the second part, we saw the creation side of the story and how he came to essentially become more human on the inside and learnt the language, the origin of the story of man, and also the fall of man with the book Paradise Lost that he went on to read. Over this time, the old man befriended him, and it was through true loss when the wolves killed him, and in that small moment of grief that he had, where he was blamed for his death by the men that entered the room, it was where his soul was then filled with rage and he wanted to seek out his maker. The creation felt like he was trapped due to the fact that death was something that would always pass him by, and the feeling of love for the first time in his life, which was Elizabeth, gave him this desire to not want to walk this world alone for the rest of time. He was made up of all of these parts from people that had died, yet he was forced to keep on living. It was a haunting reality for Id. This is why it set out on this quest to find Victor and get him to make a companion for him. However, with Victor refusing to do so, that was when the creation set about tormenting him for the rest of his days until he finally made one for him. The words, "You only listen to me when I'm violent towards you," when the creation found Victor out on the ice, tied back into that point of how human nature tends to respond to it, but also the background that Victor came from. We saw just how invincible the creation was when a stick of dynamite didn't do anything to him. This was what connected to the moment where the movie opened, where the group of sailors that were heading to the North Pole in the treacherous conditions due to the blind ambition of Captain Anderson was then realized. And it was also why "Bring him to me" was being echoed all throughout the start, because he planned on tormenting him until a companion was made. Victor was slowly dying as the creation told his version of events, and with Victor suddenly being faced with death, the ability to escape the world in which he was now being hunted, he began to empathize and realize the damage that he'd done not only to himself, but also to his family in his pursuit of an extremely ambitious task. Victor saw himself that he was the monster of this story, and that it was his own actions that caused the suffering for the creation. In his dying moments, Victor apologized to his creation and asked him what recourse that he had to live, implying that he knew that he'd essentially be struggling and wandering alone for eternity with no purpose whatsoever, showing that he had truly changed in his dying moments. It was only then that he accepted responsibility for his creation when he was faced with the very thing that it could never have. His blind ambition of curing death, something which people never want to arrive, ended up being a curse far worse than death itself, and it cost him everything that he ever had or wanted. With the creation leaving following his death and being referred to as Victor's son, and him referring to Victor as his father, he did the captain a favor and pushed the boat off onto the water, and that was where, after hearing the story, the captain changed his mind on heading to the North Pole. This is because through the stories that were told, he saw how blind ambition can cause more damage than good, and it isn't always worth it. With the final shot being the creation walking out into a vast open landscape, it implied that there was nothing out there for him, but also, at the same time, there was everything too. There was a look on his face where it also showed that he was free for the first time in his life and he could now move on and find his purpose. He was no longer the monster because Victor no longer viewed him as one. My review of the movie. I thought this was a really good film. The opening scene of it really set the tone and it hooked me instantly. The brutality of what the creation was putting upon the crew showed just how strong he was. Seriously, the way that he was throwing people around like it was nothing and then tilting the ship over had me shocked. It was a great way of establishing the dark tone and the backdrop for the entirety of the film. The performances are what really held up this movie though. The possessive and obsessive nature that Oscar Isaac's Victor Frankenstein had made the character feel so immersive, and you could really feel that ambition and desire to be greater than his father. I also feel like Jacob Elordi as the creation, despite not needing to say much for the most part of the film, there was a lot of work that needed to be done with the eyes and the facial expressions, and I felt that sheer emotion that he was conveying. I felt for the monster, and that was exactly how the movie wanted to make us feel. Even though this film was 2 hours and 20 minutes, it didn't feel like that in the slightest. With it being broken up into different sections and having Victor's experience and then the creation's experience, it was a great way for the story to be told, and it truly allowed us to get a deeper look inside the mind of the creation and see how troubled of an individual he was and the desire that he had to just not be alone. This was a movie that I wished that I went to the cinema and watched when it released last month. The visuals were simply spectacular. From the shots of the laboratory that was built, to it being engulfed in flames, to the vast open landscape, and even the fight scenes. They were just beautiful to look at, and I wish I took the opportunity to see it on the big screen. Even though this is a fictitious story, I love watching TV series and movies set in the 1800s, and this perfectly encapsulated the feeling of that time period perfectly. With regards to the deeper themes that were in the movie, I thought the symbolism that was present, but also the fact that the core themes of revenge, blind ambition, and the act of playing God were all explored in ways that were right in front of us, but they were also hidden in characters, actions, and behaviors, so it was nice to see it across the board. Now, I've made this video and it's a Friday, and I'd say this is the perfect movie to put on over the weekend. It's engaging, it's visually incredible, and the performances are something to truly write home about, so make sure you give it a watch. So, there you have it, a review of Frankenstein and the ending explained. If you want to see more of your favourite TV series and movies being broken down, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of this movie? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.